Hi, I'm Emma. For 3 years, I believed my mother-in-law when she said I was like the daughter she never had. But while I bent over backward to earn her approval, she was systematically destroying my marriage from the inside. She told my husband I was ungrateful, that I didn't appreciate family, that I was trying to steal him away from where he belonged. What if the truth is she never wanted me to succeed? And what if that scratch down the side of my brand new Honda wasn't random vandalism, but the beginning of the end of her control over our lives? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It started with a phrase that felt like warm honey coating every family gathering. Family first, always, Patricia Mitchell would say, her voice dripping with the kind of maternal wisdom that made you want to nod along even when something felt off. She'd been saying it since the day Ryan first brought me home to Riverside, California, 3 years ago. Back then I thought it was beautiful. The way she'd gather us all in her living room on Oak Street, the way she'd insist on cooking Sunday dinner every week, the way she'd pull me aside and whisper, "You're the daughter I always wanted, Emma." I believed every word. That belief kept me compliant for years, especially whenever family first meant sacrificing what I wanted for what Patricia thought was best. It was early October in Riverside, the kind of crisp Saturday morning where the autumn air felt clean enough to wash away any lingering doubt. I was sitting in my driveway, still in my pajamas, holding a steaming cup of coffee and admiring my brand new 2024 Honda Accord. Midnight blue, leather seats, that new car smell still clinging to every surface. It was the first car I'd ever bought completely on my own, no cosigner, no help from anyone. Just 3 years of working 60-hour weeks at the marketing firm downtown and saving every penny I could. Ryan was still asleep inside our house on Willow Lane when my phone buzzed. Patricia's name lit up the screen, and I hesitated for just a moment before answering. "Good morning, sweetheart," she cooed through the speaker. "I hope you have time for coffee today. There's something important I need to discuss with you about Ryan's future." That tone again, sweet concern wrapped around what always felt like an ultimatum. She didn't waste time with small talk. "I've been thinking about that new job opportunity in Portland. You know, the one Ryan mentioned last month? I really think he should take it. It's such a wonderful chance for advancement." I nearly choked on my coffee. Ryan had mentioned it once, briefly, and we'd both agreed it wasn't worth discussing. The pay increase was minimal, and it would mean leaving everything we'd built in Riverside. "Patricia," I said carefully, "we've talked about this, Ryan and I both love it here. My career is really taking off at the firm, and we just bought this house." "Oh, Emma," she sighed, and I could practically hear her shaking her head. "You're so focused on your little job. But this is about Ryan's career, his future. Sometimes wives have to make sacrifices. That's what family first means." There it was again, that phrase that somehow always meant I needed to give up something important. I swallowed the frustration building in my chest. "I understand, but this is a decision Ryan and I need to make together." "Of course, dear," she replied, though her voice had cooled several degrees. "I just hope you'll remember who's been in Ryan's life the longest. Some things are more important than personal ambition." After hanging up, I stared at my phone, waiting for the familiar guilt to wash over me. It didn't come. Instead, there was just a dull ache, and the growing realization that I'd been having this same conversation, in different forms, for 3 years. Back inside, I found Ryan making breakfast, his dark hair still messy from sleep. He smiled when he saw me, the kind of genuine warmth that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. "Your mom called," I said, sliding onto a stool at our kitchen island. "About Portland again." His smile faded slightly. "Emma, I told you I'm not interested in that job. I don't know why she keeps bringing it up." "She thinks I'm holding you back," I said quietly. Ryan set down his spatula and turned to face me fully. "That's ridiculous. You're not holding me back from anything. If anything, you've made my life better in every possible way." I wanted to believe him completely, but something Patricia had said stuck with me. Who's been in Ryan's life the longest? It was a reminder, subtle but clear, that she had decades of influence over him, and I had 3 years. That afternoon, I decided to surprise Ryan with dinner from his favorite Italian place downtown. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Patricia's silver BMW parked across the street. Strange, since she usually called before coming over. I walked through our front door to find her sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of tea, looking completely at home. "Oh, Emma," she said, standing up with that practiced smile. "I hope you don't mind. Ryan let me in before he went to the store. I was just admiring your lovely home." She gestured around our kitchen, but something in her tone felt off. It's so cozy, she continued. Though I did notice the paint in the guest room is starting to chip. And that carpet in the living room, well, it's seen better days, hasn't it? I looked around our house, which Ryan and I had spent months renovating together. The paint was perfect, the carpet was brand new. I think everything looks great, I said, confused. Oh, of course it does, dear, Patricia said quickly. I just meant that when you're young, you don't always notice these things. Experience teaches you to see what needs improvement. There was that word again. Improvement. Always paired with the suggestion that I wasn't quite enough, wasn't quite seeing clearly, wasn't quite meeting some invisible standard she held. Ryan returned 20 minutes later, arms full of grocery bags. Mom, he said, genuinely pleased to see her. I didn't expect you to stay. I was just visiting with Emma, Patricia said, shooting me a look that felt almost conspiratorial. We were discussing some home improvements. You know how much I love helping you two create the perfect space. That evening, after Patricia left, I mentioned her comments to Ryan. She said the paint was chipping, and the carpet looked old. I told him as we cleaned up dinner dishes. Ryan frowned. That's weird. We literally just redid all of that 6 months ago. Maybe she needs glasses. He laughed, but I didn't. There was something deliberate about her observations, something designed to make me second-guess myself. I'd been experiencing these moments more frequently lately, small comments that left me feeling like I was somehow failing at being a good wife, a good daughter-in-law, a good person. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to take a walk around our neighborhood. Maple Grove was the kind of subdivision where people knew each other's names and actually waved when they passed on the street. Mrs. Helen Porter, our elderly neighbor from 3 houses down, was already outside watering her roses. Good morning, Emma, she called out warmly. That's a beautiful new car you have there. I saw it when you drove in yesterday. Thank you, I said, glancing back at my Honda. I'm still getting used to having something so nice. Mrs. Porter nodded knowingly. You should enjoy it, dear. You work so hard. She paused, adjusting her glasses. Though I have to say, I was a bit concerned last night when I saw someone near it around midnight. Probably just someone walking their dog, but in this day and age,
preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
You can never be too careful. My stomach tightened. Someone near my car. Did you see who it was? Oh, I couldn't make out much in the dark, she said apologetically. Just a figure by the driver's side. They moved away when my motion light came on. I'm sure it was nothing, but I thought you should know. I thanked Mrs. Porter and walked quickly back to my house, my mind racing. When I reached my driveway, I circled my car slowly, looking for any signs of tampering. Everything seemed normal until I reached the passenger side. There, running from the front wheel, well to the back door, was a thin scratch in the paint. Not deep enough to reach the metal, but definitely intentional. My heart started pounding as I pulled out my phone and took pictures from every angle. Ryan was still getting ready for work when I burst through the front door. Someone scratched my car, I said, showing him the photos. His face immediately darkened. Are you serious? When did this happen? Mrs. Porter saw someone near it around midnight. I explained. This had to be deliberate. The scratch is too long and straight to be accidental. Ryan grabbed his keys. I'm calling the police. This is vandalism. Wait, I said, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe we should think about this first. But Ryan was already dialing. Within an hour, Officer David Kane was standing in our driveway, examining my car and taking notes. He was thorough, professional, and surprisingly sympathetic. I've seen this kind of damage before, he said, pointing to the scratch. Definitely looks intentional. The depth and length suggests someone used a key or similar object. Have you had any conflicts with neighbors? Any recent disputes? I shook my head. Nothing I can think of. We get along well with everyone here. Officer Kane handed me a case number and explained the process for filing an insurance claim. I'll be honest with you, he said quietly. Without witnesses or security footage, cases like this rarely get solved. But you should definitely report it to your insurance company and keep an eye out for any other incidents. After he left, I sat on my front steps feeling violated and confused. Someone had deliberately damaged my car while I slept. The randomness of it felt almost worse than if I'd known who did it or why. Ryan sat down beside me and put his arm around my shoulders. I'm so sorry, Em. I know how much this car means to you. I leaned into him, grateful for his support, but unable to shake the feeling that this wasn't random at all. What if it wasn't a stranger? I said quietly. What if someone I know did this? Like who? Ryan asked, though his voice had an edge to it. I don't know, I just can't imagine why a random person would target our house specifically. That afternoon, while Ryan was at work, I decided to drive around the neighborhood and see if any other cars had been damaged. I spent an hour cruising up and down every street within a 5-block radius. Every car I saw was pristine. No scratches, no dents, no signs of vandalism anywhere. Just my Honda, singled out for reasons I couldn't understand. I was pulling back into my driveway when Patricia's BMW turned onto our street. She parked behind me and got out with a concerned expression that looked almost theatrical. Emma, darling, she said, walking quickly toward me. Ryan told me about your car. How absolutely terrible. Do you have any idea who would do such a thing? Something about her tone felt off, too casual for the situation. No, I said, watching her face carefully. The police think it was probably random vandalism. Patricia walked around to the passenger side of my car and examined the scratch closely. Oh my, she said, running her finger just above the damaged paint. That's quite extensive, isn't it? And on such a new car, you must be devastated. There was something in the way she said devastated that made my skin crawl. Not sympathetic, exactly, but almost satisfied. It's just a car, I said, though my voice came out sharper than I intended. Oh, of course, Patricia said quickly. Though I do hope this doesn't affect the resale value too much. You know how these things can snowball. I stared at her. Resale value. I'd owned the car for less than a month, and her first concern was whether it would be worth less money if I tried to sell it. I'm not planning to sell it, I said evenly. Well, no, of course not, she replied, but she was still staring at the scratch with what looked almost like fascination. I just meant that these kinds of damages can be so hard to repair properly. Sometimes the touch-up paint never quite matches, you know. After she left, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the scratch and replaying our conversation. Patricia had seemed less surprised by the vandalism than concerned about it. Less sympathetic than curious about the details. And her comment about resale value felt like salt in a wound, as if she was already imagining my beautiful new car diminished and damaged. That evening, Ryan and I filed the insurance claim over the phone. The representative was helpful, but warned us that vandalism claims could sometimes affect our rates, especially if there were multiple incidents. Let's hope this was just a one-time thing, she said cheerfully. After we hung up, Ryan pulled me close on the couch. I'm sorry this happened to you, he said. I know how much getting this car meant to you. He was right. The Honda represented more than just transportation to me. It was proof that I could take care of myself, that I was building a successful independent life. Every month for 3 years, I'd transferred money into my car fund instead of buying clothes or going out to dinner. I'd driven my old car for 2 years past, when I should have replaced it, just to save enough for something reliable and new. It's not just about the car, I said quietly. It's about feeling safe in my own neighborhood. Someone came onto our property in the middle of the night and damaged something I worked so hard for. Ryan tightened his arms around me. We'll figure this out, he promised. And if anything like this happens again, I'm installing security cameras immediately. I wanted to believe that would be enough, but something told me this was just the beginning. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I couldn't shake the image of Patricia running her finger over the scratch on my car, or the way she'd seemed more interested in the damage than disturbed by it. Family first, always, she'd said so many times. But what happened when family was the one you needed protection from? The next morning brought a new kind of clarity. I woke up before my alarm and found myself standing at the window, looking down at my car in the early dawn light. The scratch seemed more prominent somehow, a jagged reminder that someone wanted to hurt me enough to creep around my house in the darkness. But as I stood there, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life, I realized something important. I wasn't going to let whoever did this make me feel small or unsafe in my own home. I was going to find out who scratched my car, and I was going to make sure they understood that Emma Collins wasn't someone you could intimidate into silence. Parts 2. The pattern emerges. The insurance adjuster arrived on Tuesday morning, a middle-aged woman named Carol, with kind eyes and a clipboard full of forms. She examined my Honda with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen every type of damage imaginable. "This is definitely intentional," she confirmed, photographing the scratch from multiple angles. "The consistency of the depth and the straight line pattern indicate someone used a sharp object, probably a key or knife, and dragged it deliberately along the paint." Hearing it stated so matter-of-factly made my stomach turn. Someone had stood in my driveway in the middle of the night, deliberately destroying something I cherished. "Have you had any recent conflicts with anyone?" Carol asked, echoing Officer Kane's question from the day before. "Any workplace disputes, relationship issues, neighbor problems?" I shook my head, but even as I did, Patricia's face flashed through my mind. The way she'd examined the scratch so closely, the strange comments about resale value, the timing of her visit right after I'd refused to consider the Portland job. "The good news is that this type of damage is completely covered under your comprehensive coverage," Carol continued. "We can get you set up with one of our preferred auto body shops, and they'll have your car looking like new within a week." She handed me a list of approved repair facilities. "I'd recommend Precision Auto Works on Main Street. They do excellent work with Honda paint matching." After Carol left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the repair estimate. $850 worth of damage from what probably took someone 30 seconds to inflict. The violation felt even worse than the financial cost. Someone had invaded my safe space, damaged my property, and walked away without consequence. I was scrolling through my phone, looking up reviews for the auto body shops, when a text message popped up from Jessica Barnes, my best friend since college. "Coffee later. I have drama to share about my mother-in-law situation." The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica had been dealing with her own challenging in-law relationship for years, though hers was more about boundary issues and unwanted advice than anything malicious. I texted back suggesting we meet at Bean There Cafe downtown at 2 o'clock. The cafe was busy with the lunch crowd when I arrived, but Jessica had already secured our usual corner table by the window. She stood up to hug me, her curly red hair bouncing as she moved. "You look stressed," she said immediately. "What's going on?" I told her about the car incident, watching her expression shift from sympathy to concern to something that looked almost like recognition. "Emma," she said carefully, stirring sugar into her latte, "can I ask you something that might sound paranoid?" I nodded, grateful that someone was finally treating this situation with the seriousness it deserved. "Has Patricia ever made comments about your car before? About how much money you spent on it, or whether you really needed something so nice?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "How did you know?" Jessica's face darkened. "Because my mother-in-law did the same thing before she keyed my car 2 years ago." The cafe noise faded into background static. "Your mother-in-law keyed your car, small scratch on the driver's side door," Jessica confirmed. "Right after I got promoted and bought a new Subaru. She'd been making passive-aggressive comments for weeks about how I was becoming too big for my britches and forgetting where I came from. I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole." "Did you ever prove it was her?" "Not legally," Jessica said. "But I installed a security camera after the first incident, and I caught her on video the second time she tried it. She denied everything, of course, said the footage was too dark to tell who it was. But David finally saw her for what she really was." David was Jessica's husband, and from what I'd observed, he'd developed a much healthier relationship with his mother's manipulation over the past few years. "What did you do?" I asked, leaning forward across the small table. "I documented everything," Jessica said firmly. "Every snide comment, every boundary violation, every time she tried to undermine my relationship with David. I started keeping a journal, saving text messages, recording phone calls when it was legal to do so. And when she finally went too far, I had proof." The idea of documenting Patricia's behavior had never occurred to me, but suddenly it seemed obvious. How many times had she made comments that left me feeling confused or diminished? How many conversations had ended with me questioning my own judgment? "The thing is," Jessica continued, People like our mothers-in-law are experts at plausible deniability. Every individual incident seems small enough to overlook. It's only when you start tracking the pattern that you realize how calculated it all is. I spent the rest of our coffee date telling Jessica about the Portland job pressure, the home improvement comments, and the strange timing of Patricia's visit after the vandalism. Jessica listened with judgment, occasionally nodding in recognition. She's testing your boundaries, she concluded. Seeing how much she can get away with before you push back. The car scratch was probably meant to make you feel unsafe and dependent. Walking back to my own car after coffee, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that someone understood what I was experiencing, and that I wasn't imagining the manipulation. Dread because, if Jessica was right, this was just the beginning. I stopped at a small electronics store on the way home, and bought a notebook specifically for documenting incidents with Patricia. If she wanted to play psychological games, I was going to start keeping score. That evening, Ryan came home from work, with a bouquet of sunflowers and a bottle of my favorite wine. I know today was rough with the insurance stuff, he said, kissing my cheek. I thought we could order pizza and have a quiet night. I appreciated the gesture, but something was bothering me about his reaction to the whole situation. He was being supportive and kind, but he didn't seem particularly outraged or concerned about our safety. Ryan, I said as we settled onto the couch with glasses of wine, do you think it's strange that someone specifically targeted our house? Out of all the cars in the neighborhood, they chose mine. He considered this for a moment. I think random criminals look for easy targets. Your car was probably just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I walked around the entire neighborhood. I pressed. No other cars were damaged. Not one. Ryan's expression shifted slightly, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't want to think about. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything specific, I said carefully. I just think we should consider that this might not have been random. Emma, Ryan said gently. I know you're upset about the car, but jumping to conspiracy theories isn't going to help us feel safer. His dismissal stung more than I expected. I wasn't being paranoid or dramatic. I was being logical. Someone had specifically chosen to damage my property, and pretending it was random wouldn't protect us from future incidents. I'm going to start keeping track of anything unusual that happens around here, I said quietly, just in case there's a pattern. Ryan nodded absently, already reaching for the remote. Sure, if it makes you feel better. The next morning, I made my first entry in Patricia documentation notebook. October 15th, the Portland job conversation. I wrote down everything I could remember about the phone call, including her exact words about family first and wives making sacrifices. Then I added her comments about the house improvements, and her strange reaction to seeing the scratch on my car. Reading it back, the pattern Jessica had mentioned was already starting to emerge. I was getting ready for work when my phone rang. Patricia again, calling earlier than usual. Good morning, sweetheart, she said in that familiar sing-song want. I wanted to check on you after yesterday's excitement. Are you feeling better about the car situation? Something about the way she phrased it rubbed me wrong. Excitement seemed like an odd word choice for vandalism. I'm managing, I said neutrally. The insurance company is taking care of the repairs. Oh, that's wonderful, Patricia replied, though she sounded almost disappointed. I was worried you might decide the car wasn't worth keeping after something like this. Sometimes when our possessions get damaged, it makes us realize we were too attached to material things. I almost dropped my coffee mug. I'm not getting rid of my car, Patricia. It's barely a month old. Of course not, dear, she said quickly. I just meant that sometimes these experiences teach us valuable lessons about what really matters in life. Family, for instance, is so much more important than cars or houses or jobs. There it was again, the subtle suggestion that my priorities were wrong, that caring about my possessions made me shallow or misguided. Actually, I said, surprising myself with my directness. This experience has taught me that I need to be more protective of the things I work hard for. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Well, Patricia said finally, her voice noticeably cooler. I suppose we all process these things differently. I just hope you don't let this incident make you paranoid or suspicious of people who care about you. After hanging up, I immediately wrote down every detail of the conversation in my notebook. Her use of the word excitement, her suggestion that I should get rid of the car, her warning about becoming paranoid. None of it felt like normal mother-in-law concern. It felt like someone trying to gauge the effectiveness of their psychological manipulation. At work that morning, I found it difficult to concentrate on my marketing problems. My mind kept circling back to Patricia's phone call and Jessica's revelation about her own mother-in-law's behavior. During my lunch break, I decided to do some research. I searched online for information about in-law manipulation and property damage, and what I found made my blood run cold. There were dozens of forum posts and articles about exactly this scenario: controlling in-laws who felt threatened by their children's spouses and escalated to property damage. As a way of asserting dominance, the pattern was always the same: subtle psychological manipulation, escalating boundary violations, and then deliberate sabotage, designed to make the target feel unsafe or question their own judgment. One article particularly caught my attention. It was written by a family therapist who specialized in in-law conflicts. Property destruction serves multiple purposes for the manipulative family member, she wrote. It demonstrates their willingness to escalate beyond verbal and emotional tactics. It creates a sense of vulnerability in the target, and it often serves as a test to see how the spouse will react, and whether they'll support their partner or their family of origin. Reading those words, I felt like someone had turned a spotlight on my entire relationship with Patricia. Every conversation, every comment, every moment of feeling like I was somehow failing to meet her expectations suddenly made sense within this framework. She wasn't just a difficult mother-in-law. She was actively working to undermine my marriage and my sense of security. I called Jessica during my afternoon break. "I've been doing research," I said without preamble. "I think you're right about the pattern, but I don't know what to do about it." "Document everything," Jessica advised, "and start paying attention to how she talks to Ryan about you when you're not around. That's usually where the real manipulation happens." That evening, I watched Ryan's interactions with his mother more carefully than I ever had before. She called during dinner, as she did most nights, and I listened to his side of the conversation with new ears. "Yeah, Mom, the insurance is handling it," he said, glancing at me apologetically. "No, Emma's doing fine. She's not letting it get to her." There was a long pause while Patricia spoke. "I don't think that's necessary," Ryan said, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "We can handle our own security." After he hung up, I asked what Patricia had suggested. "She thinks we should consider moving back closer to family," Ryan said, not meeting my eyes. "She's worried about the crime rate in this neighborhood." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. One incident of vandalism, and Patricia is already using it to suggest we uproot our entire life and move closer to her sphere of influence. "What did you tell her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I told her we're happy here and we're not moving," Ryan said firmly. "But she does have a point about the security. Maybe we should look into getting cameras or an alarm system." I agreed that better security was a good idea, but I could see how Patricia was already twisting the situation to serve her agenda. The car scratch wasn't just about damaging my property, it was about creating leverage to pull Ryan back into her orbit. That night, I lay awake thinking about the psychological game I was caught in. Patricia had spent 3 years positioning herself as the wise, caring mother figure while systematically undermining my confidence and my relationship with Ryan. The car incident was just the latest escalation in a campaign I was only beginning to understand. I thought about the notebook hidden in my dresser drawer, already containing several pages of documented manipulation. I thought about Jessica's advice to pay attention to what Patricia said to Ryan when I wasn't around. And I thought about the family therapist's article, which had warned that property destruction was often a precursor to more serious boundary violations. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I made a decision. I wasn't going to continue being a passive victim in Patricia's psychological games. I was going to start playing by my own rules, and the first rule was that everything she said and did was going to be documented, analyzed, and preserved as evidence of her true character. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Patricia Mitchell had made a mistake when she keyed my car. She'd crossed a line that transformed her from a difficult mother-in-law into someone who had committed a crime against me, and now I was going to prove it. I started my day by calling Precision Auto Works to schedule the repair appointment for my Honda. Then I drove to the electronics store and bought a small digital voice recorder. If Patricia wanted to play psychological games, I was going to make sure I had evidence of every move she made. The quiet, compliant daughter-in-law she thought she was manipulating was about to become her worst nightmare. Because I was done being Emma the pushover. It was time for Patricia to meet Emma the prosecutor. Part 6: Mine the Deeper Betrayal. The security camera installation appointment was scheduled for Thursday morning, and I made sure to take the day off work so I could be present for every detail. The technician, a young man named Marcus who worked for Guardian Home Security, arrived promptly at 8 o'clock with a van full of equipment. "We're going to set you up with a comprehensive system," he explained, walking around the perimeter of our house. "Motion-activated cameras at all entry points, plus one focused specifically on your driveway where the vehicle damage occurred." As Marcus worked, I found myself studying every angle of our property with new eyes. The house Ryan and I had bought together suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed in ways I'd never considered before. Our cozy corner lot that had seemed so private now revealed multiple blind spots where someone could approach undetected. The mature oak trees we'd loved for their shade also provided perfect cover for anyone wanting to move around our property without being seen. "The system will send alerts directly to your phone," Marcus continued, mounting a camera above our front door. "You'll get a notification every time there's motion detected, and you can access the live feed from anywhere. The footage is stored in the cloud for 30 days, so you'll have a permanent record of anything that happens." I appreciated his professionalism, but something about needing to turn my home into a fortress left me feeling deeply unsettled. Ryan had left for work before the installation began, but Patricia called while Marcus was still working. I let it go to voicemail.
Hey,
Focusing instead on learning how to operate our new security system. When I finally listened to her message, her voice had that particular tone I was beginning to recognize as artificially sweet concern. "Emma dear, I heard you're having cameras installed today. I think that's very wise, though I do hope it doesn't make you feel like you're living in a prison. Sometimes when we become too focused on security, we lose the joy of feeling at home in our own space." The comment irritated me more than it should have. Even my decision to protect myself was being framed as somehow excessive or problematic. I saved the voicemail on my phone and added the details to my documentation notebook. Patricia seemed to have an opinion about every choice I made, and none of those opinions ever seemed supportive of my autonomy or well-being. That afternoon, while testing the camera system on my phone, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Your husband deserves better than someone who causes so much drama in the family. Maybe it's time to step back and let the people who really love him take care of his happiness." The message made my hands shake as I read it. Someone was escalating beyond property damage to direct threats. I immediately screenshot the message and called Officer Kane. He agreed to meet me at the house within an hour to discuss what he called escalating harassment. When he arrived, I showed him the text message, the voicemail from Patricia, and my growing documentation of unusual incidents. "This is good work," he said, reviewing my notebook. "You're building a solid timeline of harassment. Have you considered that these incidents might be connected?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Officer Kane was giving me permission to voice the suspicion I'd been carrying for days. "I think my mother-in-law might be behind this," I said quietly. "I know how it sounds, but the timing is too convenient. Every incident happens right after I've asserted some kind of independence or refused to go along with what she wants." Officer Kane nodded thoughtfully. "Family harassment cases are some of the most difficult to prosecute because the behavior often starts small and escalates gradually. But if you're right about the connection, this person is likely to make mistakes as they become more bold. The key is documenting everything and staying one step ahead of their tactics." He helped me file a formal report about the threatening text message and advised me to forward any future communications directly to the police department. "Don't respond to any more anonymous messages," he warned. "Engagement often encourages escalation. Just save everything and let us handle the investigation." After he left, I felt simultaneously more secure and more frightened than before. Having official police involvement validated my concerns, but it also confirmed that I was dealing with someone potentially dangerous. That evening, Ryan came home to find me sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by printouts of text messages, camera system manuals, and my documentation notebook. "This looks intense," he said, kissing the top of my head. "How did the installation go?" I showed him how to access the camera feeds on his phone and explained Officer Kane's visit. "He thinks whoever is doing this will probably escalate and make mistakes," I said. "We just need to be patient and keep documenting everything." Ryan's expression grew more serious as I walked him through the anonymous text message and Patricia's voicemail. I don't like the idea of someone threatening you, he said firmly. But Emma, I have to ask, are you sure you want to suspect my mother without any real proof? I know she can be difficult, but deliberately harassing you seems pretty extreme. His response disappointed me, though it wasn't entirely unexpected. Patricia had spent decades building her relationship with Ryan, carefully positioning herself as his loving, devoted mother. 3 years of marriage wasn't enough time to undo that foundation, especially when her manipulation was so subtle. I'm not accusing anyone specific, I said carefully. I'm just tracking patterns and keeping records in case they become important later. Ryan nodded, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to support me, but he also couldn't quite believe his mother might be capable of criminal behavior. That cognitive dissonance was exactly what Patricia had been counting on for years. The next morning brought a new wrinkle in the developing situation. I was getting ready for work when my phone buzzed with a notification from the security system. Someone was at our front door. I pulled up the live camera feed and saw Patricia standing on our porch, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish. It was barely 7 in the morning, and Ryan had already left for his early meeting downtown. I watched through the camera as Patricia knocked several times, then walked around to peer through our kitchen window. When she didn't get a response, she pulled out her phone and typed something. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a text from her. I brought you some comfort food after this stressful week. I'm leaving it on the porch. I hope you know how much I care about you during this difficult time. Something about the message felt performative, like she was creating a paper trail of appearing supportive while simultaneously violating my boundaries by showing up unannounced. I waited until she drove away before opening the front door to retrieve the casserole dish. Attached to the foil covering was a handwritten note. Sometimes when we're feeling overwhelmed, we need to remember that family is the only thing we can truly count on. I'm here whenever you need someone who understands what Ryan needs to be happy. The note felt like a subtle threat disguised as support. The implication was clear. Patricia saw herself as the expert on Ryan's happiness, and I was somehow failing to provide it. I photographed the note and added it to my documentation file, then put the casserole in our refrigerator without tasting it. I'd learned not to trust anything that came from Patricia's kitchen, especially when it arrived with psychological manipulation attached. At work that day, I found myself distracted and jumpy every time my phone buzzed with a security system notification. Most of the alerts were triggered by delivery trucks or neighbors walking their dogs, but the constant vigilance was exhausting. During my lunch break, I called Jessica to update her on the escalating situation. She's testing your security system, Jessica said immediately. Showing up when she knows Ryan isn't home, leaving gifts with manipulative notes. She's gathering intelligence about your defenses. The idea that Patricia was conducting reconnaissance on my home felt surreal, but it also explained her behavior perfectly. Every interaction had become a data-gathering operation, designed to find my weak points and exploit them. What should I do? I asked Jessica. You keep documenting and you stop engaging, she replied firmly. Don't thank her for the casserole. Don't acknowledge the note. Don't give her any feedback about how her tactics are affecting you. People like Patricia feed off emotional reactions. Starve her of that fuel. That afternoon, I received another anonymous text message. Some wives understand their place in the family hierarchy. Others need to learn it the hard way. Your choice. This time I didn't feel fear so much as anger. Someone was actively trying to intimidate me into submission, and I was tired of feeling like a victim. I forwarded the message to Officer Kane as instructed, but I also made a decision to take more active steps to protect myself. I spent my lunch break researching private investigators in the Riverside area. If the police couldn't move quickly enough to identify my harasser, maybe I needed to hire someone who could. I found a firm called Accurate Investigations that specialized in harassment cases and domestic security. Their website featured testimonials from clients who dealt with stalking, threatening behavior and family disputes that had escalated beyond normal boundaries. The investigator I spoke with, a woman named Linda Foster, who had 15 years of experience with harassment cases, agreed to meet me that evening at a coffee shop near my office. She was professional, direct and refreshingly free of judgment about my suspicions. Family harassment is more common than people realize, she explained over coffee, especially in cases where someone feels their control over a family member is being threatened by marriage or other major life changes. Linda reviewed my documentation with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen similar patterns many times before. "You're doing excellent work with the record keeping," she said approvingly. "The timeline clearly shows escalation, and the anonymous messages suggest someone who's becoming desperate to regain control. The key now is gathering evidence that connects these incidents to a specific person." She explained that her investigation would involve monitoring my social media, tracking the anonymous messages, and conducting discreet surveillance around my home and workplace. "If your mother-in-law is behind this, she'll make mistakes," Linda assured me. "People who escalate to this level of harassment usually can't maintain the subtlety required to avoid detection indefinitely." I hired Linda on the spot, using money from my emergency fund to pay her retainer. For the first time since the car incident, I felt like I was taking meaningful action instead of just reacting to attacks. Someone was finally going to help me gather proof of what I'd been experiencing, and that person had the professional skills to do it properly. That evening, I debated whether to tell Ryan about hiring a private investigator. On one hand, it felt like a significant step that he should know about. On the other hand, I knew he'd probably think I was overreacting or becoming obsessed with the situation. I decided to wait until Linda had some preliminary findings before bringing Ryan into that aspect of my response plan. Over dinner, I showed Ryan the latest anonymous text message and Patricia's note from the morning casserole delivery. "This is definitely escalating," he agreed, though he still seemed reluctant to consider that his mother might be involved. "I think we should invite my parents over for dinner this weekend," he suggested. "If Mom is feeling left out or concerned about something, maybe we can address it directly." The suggestion made my skin crawl. The last thing I wanted was to have Patricia in my home, studying my security measures and looking for new ways to manipulate the situation. But I recognized that Ryan was trying to solve the problem using the communication strategies that had worked in his family for decades. He couldn't yet see that those strategies were designed to protect Patricia's control rather than address legitimate concerns. "Let me think about it," I said carefully. "I want to make sure we approach this the right way." What I really meant was that I wanted to consult with Linda Foster before exposing myself to Patricia's manipulation in my own home. But I couldn't say that without revealing that I'd hired a private investigator, and I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. That night, I lay in bed listening to every sound in the house, hyper-aware of the security cameras monitoring our perimeter, and the phone charging beside me that would alert me to any movement outside. The feeling of safety I'd once associated with our home had been systematically destroyed by someone who wanted me to feel vulnerable and dependent. But as I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, I realized something important had shifted in my mindset. I was no longer the confused, compliant daughter-in-law who accepted Patricia's manipulation as normal family dynamics. I was someone who'd identified a threat, gathered evidence, involved law enforcement, and hired professional help to protect myself. Patricia Mitchell might have thought she was dealing with the same Emma who'd been bending to her will for 3 years. But she was about to discover that Emma Collins was done being anyone's victim, and she had the resources and determination to fight back against anyone who threatened her security or happiness. The war for my marriage and my peace of mind was just beginning, but for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I had weapons worth using. The final confrontation, the breakthrough, came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late October. I was awakened by the sharp buzz of my phone receiving a security alert. Someone was moving around our driveway, and the motion-activated camera was recording everything. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and opened the security app, my heart pounding as the live feed loaded. There, illuminated clearly by our porch light and captured in high-definition detail, was Patricia Mitchell. She was dressed in dark clothing and carrying what looked like a spray paint can in one hand and a screwdriver in the other. I watched in stunned disbelief as she approached my Honda, which had just been returned from the body shop the day before with its paint fully restored. I held my breath as Patricia looked around cautiously, then knelt beside the driver's side door. She was going to scratch my car again, but this time I had proof. My finger hovered over the screen, ready to call 911, when Patricia did something unexpected. Instead of damaging the paint, she began working on the tire valve with the screwdriver. She was trying to flatten my tires. The realization that my mother-in-law was actively sabotaging my vehicle in the middle of the night sent a surge of adrenaline through my system. I quietly slipped out of bed, being careful not to wake Ryan, and crept to the window where I could see the driveway directly. Patricia was still there, moving between the front and rear tires on the driver's side, methodically trying to cause damage that would strand me at home. I pulled up Officer Kane's contact information and sent him a text message with a screenshot from the security footage. Catching vandal in the act. Need immediate response. Then I called 911, keeping my voice as quiet as possible while explaining that someone was currently vandalizing my vehicle in my driveway. The dispatcher assured me that units were being dispatched immediately and advised me to stay inside for my safety. Through the window, I watched Patricia finish with the tires and move toward the front of my car with the spray paint can. She was going to deface the hood or windshield, adding insult to the injury of the flattened tires. But as she raised the can, the distinctive wail of police sirens began echoing through our quiet neighborhood. Patricia froze like a deer in headlights, then dropped both the spray paint and screwdriver before hurrying toward the street where her BMW was parked. The first police cruiser rounded the corner onto our street just as Patricia reached her car. The officer's spotlight swept across the scene, illuminating Patricia beside her vehicle and the evidence scattered in our driveway. I watched from the window as more police cars arrived, and officers approached Patricia with their hands resting on their weapons. By this time, Ryan had woken up from the commotion and was standing beside me at the window, staring in absolute shock at the scene unfolding in our front yard. "Is that my mother?" he asked, his voice hollow with disbelief. "What is she doing here?" I showed him the security footage on my phone, watching his face transform from confusion to horror as he witnessed his mother attempting to vandalize my car. "Oh my God," Ryan breathed, sinking onto the edge of our bed. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I never thought she would actually do something like this." The apology felt sincere, but it also carried the weight of months of dismissing my concerns and defending Patricia's increasingly problematic behavior. I appreciated his shock and remorse, but I was also furious that it had taken video evidence of criminal activity to make him see what I'd been trying to tell him for weeks. Officer Kane arrived as backup and immediately came to our front door. We met him on the porch, both of us still in our pajamas and robes. "We've got her in custody," he reported grimly. "She was carrying vandalism tools, and there's physical evidence scattered around your vehicle. She's claiming this is a misunderstanding, but the video footage you sent me is pretty conclusive." He explained that Patricia would be arrested and charged with vandalism, trespassing, and possibly harassment, depending on what other evidence we could provide. "This is exactly the kind of escalation I was worried about," Officer Kane continued. "People who engage in this behavior rarely stop on their own. They usually keep pushing boundaries until they get caught or something worse happens." Ryan was quiet during the entire conversation with Officer Kane, occasionally glancing toward the police cars, where his mother was presumably being processed for arrest. I could see the internal conflict playing out across his face as he struggled to reconcile the loving mother he remembered with the woman who'd been caught red-handed, trying to sabotage his wife's property in the middle of the night. After the police left with Patricia in custody, Ryan and I sat in our kitchen drinking coffee and trying to process what had just happened. "I need to call my dad," Ryan said finally. "He's going to hear about this, and it should come from me." The phone call was brief and painful to witness. I could hear Robert Mitchell's shocked voice through the speaker as Ryan explained that Patricia had been arrested for vandalizing our property. "This explains so much," Ryan said after hanging up. "Dad said Mom has been acting strange for months, making comments about you that didn't make sense, and obsessing over our relationship in ways that worried him. He thought she was just having trouble adjusting to not being the most important woman in my life anymore." The admission that Patricia had been actively working against our marriage for months was both validating and devastating. Over the next several hours, the full scope of Patricia's campaign against me began to emerge. Linda Foster, the private investigator I'd hired, called with preliminary findings from her surveillance and digital investigation. "Your mother-in-law has been conducting what can only be described as a systematic harassment campaign," Linda reported. "She's been monitoring your social media accounts, driving by your workplace, and using multiple phone numbers to send those anonymous threatening messages." Linda explained that her investigation had uncovered Patricia's pattern of behavior going back several months. "She's been photographing your car, your house, and even you personally during your daily routines," Linda continued. "I found evidence that she's been tracking your schedule and planning these incidents around times when your husband wouldn't be home to witness them." The revelation that I'd been under surveillance by my own mother-in-law was deeply disturbing, but it also explained how she'd been able to time her harassment so precisely. "There's more," Linda said grimly. "I traced those anonymous text messages to a burner phone purchased with cash at a store near her house. She's also been using fake social media accounts to gather information about your friends and workplace. This isn't just family drama, Emma. This is stalking behavior that could have escalated to physical violence if you hadn't caught her when you did. The scope of Patricia's obsession with controlling and intimidating me was staggering. She'd essentially been conducting a one-woman psychological warfare campaign designed to make me feel unsafe, question my judgment, and ultimately drive me away from Ryan. The car scratching had been just one tactic in a much larger strategy of manipulation and harassment. Ryan's reaction to learning the full extent of his mother's behavior was swift and decisive. "I'm filing for a restraining order," he announced after Linda finished her report. "And I'm cutting off all contact with her until she gets serious psychiatric help." I was relieved by his response, but also saddened that it had taken such extreme circumstances to open his eyes to his mother's true nature. That afternoon, we went to the courthouse together to file for both a restraining order and to provide additional evidence for the criminal charges against Patricia. The prosecutor assigned to the case, a sharp woman named District Attorney Maria Santos, reviewed our documentation with professional thoroughness. "This is one of the most well-documented harassment cases I've seen," she commented approvingly. "Your record-keeping and evidence collection are going to make prosecution much easier." DA Santos explained that Patricia would likely be offered a plea deal that included mandatory psychological evaluation, community service, and restitution for the damages she'd caused. Given her age and lack of prior criminal history, she probably won't serve jail time, Santos warned. But the restraining order will legally prohibit her from contacting you or coming near your property. Violating that order would result in immediate arrest and much more serious charges. The legal proceedings moved quickly once Patricia's arrest became public knowledge. Ryan's sister Nicole called within hours of the news breaking, expressing shock and offering support. "I had no idea Mom was capable of something like this," Nicole said during a tearful phone conversation. "But looking back, there were signs that she wasn't handling your marriage well. She made comments about you that always seemed unnecessarily critical, and she was obsessed with Ryan's life in ways that weren't healthy." Nicole's validation meant more to me than I'd expected. Having another family member acknowledge Patricia's problematic behavior helped confirm that I hadn't been imagining or exaggerating the issues I'd experienced. "Ryan is lucky to have you," Nicole continued. "Mom's behavior toward you has been completely unacceptable, and I'm ashamed that it took something this extreme for our family to address it." Over the following days, more details about Patricia's harassment campaign emerged through the legal discovery process. Her phone records showed dozens of calls to Ryan, where she'd apparently been trying to convince him that I was unstable, ungrateful, or planning to leave him. She'd also been in contact with several of our neighbors, spreading rumors about my character and suggesting that I was causing problems in the community. The psychological evaluation that was part of Patricia's plea agreement revealed a woman who'd become obsessively fixated on maintaining control over her son's life and saw me as an existential threat to their relationship. The psychiatrist's report described her behavior as consistent with a personality disorder that made it difficult for her to respect boundaries or accept that other people had legitimate needs that conflicted with her desires. Mrs. Mitchell demonstrates a pattern of manipulative behavior designed to maintain control over family relationships, the psychiatrist wrote in his assessment. She appears to view her daughter-in-law not as a person with her own rights and needs, but as a competitor for her son's loyalty and attention. Her escalating harassment behavior suggests that she was willing to cause significant harm to maintain what she perceived as her rightful position in the family hierarchy. The criminal case concluded with Patricia pleading guilty to vandalism, harassment, and stalking charges. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and ordered to pay restitution for all damages she'd caused. The restraining order was granted for 5 years, legally prohibiting her from contacting
me or coming within 500 feet of our home, my workplace, or any location where I might regularly be found. Ryan's relationship with his mother was permanently altered by her arrest and the revelations about her behavior. "I can't have someone in my life who would deliberately hurt my wife," he told his father during a difficult conversation about family dynamics going forward. "What Mom did wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. Until she takes full responsibility and gets the help she needs, I can't trust her around Emma or in our lives generally." Robert Mitchell was devastated by his wife's behavior but ultimately supportive of Ryan's decision to maintain distance from Patricia. "Your mother has been struggling with some issues that I didn't fully understand," he admitted during a private conversation with both of us. "I knew she was having trouble accepting that Ryan was building his own life, but I never imagined she would escalate to this level of harassment.
I support whatever boundaries you need to set to protect your marriage and your safety. The experience of being stalked and harassed by my mother-in-law had been traumatic, but it also revealed important truths about the people in my life. Ryan's willingness to choose our marriage over his mother's manipulation showed me that our relationship was built on a foundation strong enough to withstand external pressure. The support I received from friends like Jessica, professionals like Officer Kane and Linda Foster, and even Ryan's sister Nicole demonstrated that I had a network of people who valued my safety and well-being. Most importantly, the experience taught me to trust my instincts when something felt wrong, even when other people suggested I was overreacting or being paranoid. Patricia's harassment had been real, deliberate, and escalating toward potentially dangerous behavior. My decision to document everything, seek professional help, and take protective measures had likely prevented the situation from becoming even worse. 6 months after Patricia's arrest, Ryan and I were sitting on our back patio enjoying a quiet Sunday morning when he brought up the subject of rebuilding family relationships. "I've been thinking about whether there's ever going to be a path forward with my mom," he said carefully. "Not anytime soon, and definitely not without major changes on her part. But I wonder if someday, with enough therapy and accountability, there might be a way to have some kind of limited relationship." I appreciated that Ryan was asking for my thoughts rather than making unilateral decisions about his mother's potential role in our lives. "I think that's something we'll have to evaluate based on her actions over time," I replied honestly. "Right now, I need to focus on feeling safe and rebuilding my sense of security. But I'm not opposed to the possibility that people can change if they're genuinely committed to doing the work." The restraining order was still in effect, and Patricia was still attending mandatory counseling sessions as part of her plea agreement. Occasionally, we'd hear updates through Robert or Nicole about her progress in therapy or her expressions of remorse about her behavior. But words were easy to say, and I needed to see consistent evidence of genuine change before I'd consider allowing her back into our lives in any capacity. The security cameras remained installed around our property, and I still carried the small voice recorder that had become second nature during the worst period of harassment. Some might consider these precautions excessive, but they gave me peace of mind and a sense of control over my environment that I wasn't ready to give up. The experience had taught me that safety was something I needed to actively maintain rather than simply assume. Ryan and I had also begun attending couples counseling to process the impact of his mother's behavior on our relationship and develop better communication strategies for handling family conflicts in the future. The therapist helped us understand how Patricia's manipulation had created patterns of doubt and defensiveness that we needed to actively work to overcome. "The most important thing you've both learned," our counselist observed during one session, "is that a healthy marriage requires both partners to prioritize their relationship over external pressure, even when that pressure comes from family members." Ryan's willingness to choose Emma's safety over his mother's demands, and Emma's persistence in documenting and addressing the harassment, show that you're both committed to protecting what you've built together. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that Patricia's campaign against me had ultimately backfired in spectacular fashion. Instead of driving me away from Ryan or making me question my place in his life, her harassment had forced us to confront the manipulation we'd been tolerating and strengthen our commitment to each other. She'd lost her son's trust, damaged her reputation in the community, and gained a criminal record, all in pursuit of control that she'd never actually possessed. The woman who'd once made me doubt my own judgment and question my worth as a wife had inadvertently taught me some of the most valuable lessons of my life. I'd learned to trust my instincts, document suspicious behavior, seek professional help when needed, and stand up for myself even when others suggested I was overreacting. I'd discovered that I was stronger and more resourceful than I'd ever imagined, and that the right partner would support my efforts to protect myself rather than minimize my concerns. Most importantly, I'd learned that family relationships based on manipulation and control weren't worth preserving, no matter how much tradition or social pressure suggested otherwise. True family, whether biological or chosen, was made up of people who wanted the best for each other and respected each other's autonomy and happiness. Patricia Mitchell had wanted to destroy my marriage and drive me out of her son's life. Instead, she'd strengthened our relationship and taught us both what genuine love and commitment looked like. As I sat in my garden on that peaceful Sunday morning, watching Ryan read the newspaper and listening to the birds singing in our oak trees, I felt genuinely grateful for the clarity her harassment had brought to our lives. The security cameras still monitored our property, and the restraining order remained in effect, but I no longer felt like a victim waiting for the next attack. I felt like a woman who'd faced a serious threat, protected herself and her marriage, and emerged stronger than before.
Patricia's attempts to make me feel small and powerless had accomplished exactly the opposite, and that might have been the most satisfying victory of all. The divorce papers arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in November, delivered by a courier who apologized for interrupting my workday at the marketing firm. I stared at the thick manila envelope with my name written in formal legal print, my hands trembling as I signed the delivery receipt. For a moment I thought Patricia had somehow escalated her harassment campaign to include fraudulent legal documents. But when I opened the envelope and began reading, I realized these papers had nothing to do with me. Ryan Mitchell was filing for divorce from his mother. Not literally, of course, but the legal document I was holding was a formal declaration of no contact that his attorney had drafted to supplement the restraining order. It was a comprehensive legal statement severing all financial, emotional, and practical ties between Ryan and Patricia, effectively divorcing himself from her influence in every measurable way. I called Ryan immediately, my voice shaking as I asked him to explain what I was reading. "I should have told you I was having this drafted," he said, his voice heavy with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "But I wanted it to be a surprise. After everything Mom put us through, after seeing how her manipulation nearly destroyed our marriage, I realized that half measures weren't going to be enough. She needed to understand that her behavior has permanent consequences." The document was thorough in ways I hadn't expected. Ryan was formally renouncing any claim to inheritance from Patricia, removing her as a beneficiary on all his insurance policies, and legally documenting his refusal to serve as her emergency contact or medical proxy. Most significantly, he was requesting that the court recognize his declaration of no contact as legally binding, meaning that Patricia could face additional criminal charges if she attempted to circumvent the restraining order by using other family members to communicate with him. "This isn't just about protecting you anymore," Ryan continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "It's about protecting any future children we might have, protecting our marriage from someone who sees it as a threat to be eliminated, and protecting my own mental health from a relationship that was built on manipulation and control rather than genuine love." I sat in my car in the parking lot of my office building, reading through page after page of legal language that essentially amounted to Ryan choosing our life together over the family dynamics that had shaped his entire childhood. The magnitude of what he was doing hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't just setting boundaries with his mother, he was burning every bridge that connected him to her world, ensuring that there would be no path back to the toxic patterns that had nearly destroyed us. That evening, we sat in our kitchen while Ryan explained the process he'd gone through to make this decision. "I spent weeks in therapy working through this," he said, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. "I kept trying to find a middle ground, some way to maintain a relationship with Mom while also protecting our marriage. But every scenario I explored led back to the same conclusion. She's not capable of respecting boundaries, and I'm not capable of pretending that what she did was forgivable." He told me about conversations with his therapist, discussions with his father, and sleepless nights spent reviewing the evidence of his mother's harassment campaign. "The breaking point was when I realized that I'd been gaslighting myself for months," Ryan admitted. "Every time you tried to tell me something felt wrong with Mom's behavior, I dismissed your concerns, because I couldn't accept that someone who claimed to love me could be so deliberately cruel to the person I love most." The psychological impact of Patricia's behavior on Ryan had been profound in ways I was only beginning to understand. He'd spent his entire life believing that his mother's love was unconditional, and that family loyalty meant accepting whatever treatment family members chose to dish out. Discovering that his mother was capable of criminal harassment had shattered his fundamental assumptions about love, family, and trust. "I keep thinking about all the times she called me after you two had a conversation," Ryan said, his voice becoming tight with suppressed anger. "She would tell me that you seemed upset, or that you'd said something that worried her about our relationship. I always assumed she was just being a concerned mother, but now I realize she was actively trying to create doubt and conflict between us." The revelation that Patricia had been working to undermine our marriage through manipulative phone calls was devastating but not surprising. It explained so many moments when Ryan had seemed distant or questioning after conversations with his mother, times when I'd felt like I was defending myself against accusations I didn't understand. "The night you caught her trying to vandalize your car, I finally saw her for who she really is," Ryan continued. "Not a loving mother who was struggling to accept change, but someone who was willing to commit crimes to maintain control over my life. That woman isn't someone I can have a relationship with, no matter how much shared history we have." The legal no-contact declaration was scheduled to be filed the following Monday, but Ryan wanted Patricia to understand his decision before she learned about it through official channels. He'd arranged to meet with his father at a neutral location to explain the situation and deliver a letter he'd written to his mother. Robert Mitchell had agreed to serve as an intermediary, though he'd made it clear that he understood and supported Ryan's decision. Dad said Mom has been getting worse in therapy, not better, Ryan told me after his conversation with his father. She's still blaming you for everything that happened, still insisting that she was just trying to protect our family from outside interference. The therapist says she's showing classic signs of a personality disorder that makes it nearly impossible for her to take responsibility for her own actions. The news that Patricia was continuing to blame me for her own criminal behavior was frustrating but not unexpected. People who engaged in systematic harassment rarely accepted responsibility for their actions, instead finding ways to justify their behavior as necessary or defensive. Her inability to acknowledge the harm she'd caused was just additional confirmation that Ryan's decision to sever contact was the right choice. That weekend we drove to meet Robert Mitchell at a quiet restaurant outside of Riverside. Ryan's father looked like he'd aged years in the months since Patricia's arrest, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something that looked like exhaustion mixed with grief. "I want you to know that I completely support what you're doing," he said immediately after we sat down. "Your mother's behavior toward Emma has been inexcusable, and her refusal to take responsibility for it shows that she's not ready to be part of your lives." Robert explained that he'd been living separately from Patricia since her arrest, unable to reconcile her actions with the woman he thought he'd been married to for 30 years. "I've been in my own therapy trying to understand how I missed the signs of her deteriorating mental state," he said sadly. "The therapist helped me realize that I've been enabling her controlling behavior for decades by making excuses for her and smoothing over conflicts she created." The conversation with Robert was emotional but necessary. He assured us that he would continue to have a relationship with Ryan regardless of what happened with Patricia, and he expressed genuine remorse for the times he'd failed to intervene when Patricia's treatment of me had crossed obvious lines. "I thought keeping the peace was more important than addressing the problems," he admitted. "But peace built on someone else's suffering isn't actually peace at all." Ryan handed his father the letter he'd written to Patricia, a document that was both compassionate and absolutely final in its rejection of continued contact. "I want her to understand that this isn't a temporary reaction to recent events," Ryan explained. "This is a permanent decision based on years of manipulation and the complete absence of genuine remorse for the harm she's caused." The letter, which Robert read aloud to ensure he understood its contents, was one of the most powerful pieces of writing I'd ever heard. Ryan had managed to acknowledge the positive memories from his childhood while also clearly documenting the pattern of manipulation and control that had characterized their relationship as he'd become an adult. He'd expressed love for the mother he'd once believed Patricia to be, while also making it clear that the woman who'd harassed his wife was someone he could no longer recognize or trust. "I hope someday you'll be able to understand that your actions weren't those of a loving mother protecting her son," Ryan had written. "They were the actions of someone who was willing to destroy her son's happiness to maintain control over his life. Until you can acknowledge that truth and demonstrate genuine change through your actions rather than your words, I cannot and will not have you in my life." The legal filing went smoothly the following Monday, with Ryan's attorney presenting the no-contact declaration to the court as part of the ongoing restraining order case. The judge who had presided over Patricia's criminal proceedings approved the declaration without hesitation and noted it in the official record of the harassment case. Patricia's attorney was notified of the filing but chose not to contest it, presumably because there was no legal basis for forcing an adult child to maintain contact with a parent who'd engaged in criminal harassment. The psychological impact of officially severing ties with his mother was significant for Ryan, and he increased his therapy sessions to twice weekly to help process the grief and guilt that came with such a drastic decision. "I keep waiting to feel relief," he told me one evening, after a particularly difficult session. "But mostly I just feel sad about what our family could have been if she'd been capable of respecting boundaries and genuinely caring about my happiness." The sadness was understandable, and according to Ryan's therapist, completely normal for someone who'd made the difficult decision to cut contact with a toxic family member. Grief for the relationship that could have existed was often more intense than grief for the relationship that actually had existed, especially when that relationship had been built on manipulation and conditional love. Meanwhile, Patricia's response to the legal no-contact declaration was swift and predictable. Within days of being served with the papers, she began a campaign to recruit other family members to intercede on her behalf. Ryan's extended family started receiving phone calls and visits from Patricia, who was apparently telling anyone who would listen that I'd manipulated Ryan into abandoning his mother, and that the entire situation was based on misunderstandings and overreactions. Several relatives reached out to Ryan directly, some offering support for his decision, and others questioning whether he was being too harsh. His cousin David called to express concern that Ryan was throwing away his relationship with his mother over what David characterized as a few minor incidents. The conversation that followed was enlightening in terms of how Patricia had been framing the situation to people outside our immediate circle. David honestly believed that Mom had made a few inappropriate comments and maybe been a little too involved in our marriage. Ryan told me after the call. He had no idea about the months of harassment, the threatening text messages, or the fact that she was arrested for trying to vandalize your car in the middle of the night. Mom has been presenting herself as a victim of our overreaction rather than someone who engaged in criminal stalking behavior. The misinformation campaign was frustrating but not entirely unexpected. Patricia was skilled at manipulating narrative and presenting herself as the wronged party in conflicts she'd created. The fact that she was continuing to do this even after being convicted of harassment charges showed just how deep her denial and manipulation patterns ran. Ryan decided to address the family misinformation directly by sending a group email to all his relatives with a factual summary of what had actually transpired. He included copies of the police reports, excerpts from the psychological evaluation, and a timeline of Patricia's escalating harassment behavior. The email was matter-of-fact rather than emotional, simply presenting the documented evidence and explaining that his decision was based on criminal behavior rather than family disagreements. The response to Ryan's email was mixed but generally supportive. Several relatives apologized for questioning his decision and expressed shock at learning the full extent of Patricia's behavior. Others chose to maintain their relationships with Patricia, but acknowledged that they understood why Ryan felt the need to protect his marriage and his safety. A few family members stopped communicating with Ryan entirely, apparently deciding that maintaining their relationship with Patricia was more important than supporting him. "I'm learning who my real family is," Ryan observed after the dust settled from his group email. "The people who are supporting our decision to protect ourselves are the people worth having relationships with. The people who think I should tolerate criminal harassment for the sake of family unity are people I'm better off without." The process of rebuilding our social support network without Patricia's influence was ongoing but positive. We'd grown closer to friends like Jessica, who'd provided crucial support during the worst periods of harassment. Ryan had strengthened his relationship with his sister Nicole, who'd become a fierce advocate for our marriage and a vocal critic of Patricia's behavior. Most importantly, we'd developed a deeper trust and communication pattern between ourselves that was built on complete honesty, rather than the careful navigation of family politics that had characterized our early marriage. 6 months after filing the no-contact declaration, Ryan received a call from Robert with an update on Patricia's progress in court-mandated therapy. The therapist says she's made some improvements in terms of understanding why her behavior was inappropriate. Robert reported cautiously. But she's still not ready to take full responsibility for the harassment, and she's still expressing resentment toward Emma for causing the problems in the first place. The news confirmed what we'd suspected about Patricia's likelihood of genuine change. True accountability required not just acknowledging that behaviors were wrong, but understanding and accepting responsibility for the harm those behaviors had caused. Patricia's continued resentment toward me showed that she was still operating from the same mindset that had justified her harassment campaign in the first place. "I think it's important that I don't get my hopes up about Mom ever really changing," Ryan said after processing Robert's update. "The most I can realistically hope for is that the legal consequences and social embarrassment will keep her from escalating her behavior in the future. But I don't expect her to become someone I can safely have in my life." The acceptance that Patricia would probably never become the mother Ryan had hoped for was painful but ultimately liberating. It allowed him to stop investing emotional energy in the possibility of reconciliation and focus instead on building a life that wasn't defined by her manipulation and control. Our marriage grew stronger as Ryan learned to prioritize our relationship over family expectations and social pressure. As our second wedding anniversary approached, Ryan surprised me with a thoughtful gesture that symbolized our journey through the Patricia crisis. He'd commissioned a local artist to create a custom piece for our home, a beautiful metal sculpture for our garden that incorporated elements representing growth, resilience, and protection. "I wanted something that would remind us every day that we survived someone trying to destroy our happiness," he explained as we installed the sculpture together. The anniversary itself was quiet but meaningful, a celebration of not just our marriage but our ability to protect it from external threats. We'd learned valuable lessons about trust, communication, and the importance of choosing each other even when that choice came at significant personal cost. The experience with Patricia had been traumatic, but it had also revealed strengths in our relationship that we might never have discovered under normal circumstances. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that Patricia's harassment campaign had ultimately accomplished the opposite of what she'd intended. Instead of driving me away from Ryan, or making him question his commitment to our marriage, her behavior had forced us to develop the kind of deep trust and communication that many couples never achieve. She'd wanted to prove that I wasn't good enough for her son, but she'd ended up proving that her son was exactly the kind of man worth fighting for. The security cameras still monitored our property, and I still carried the small recording device that had become second nature during the worst period of harassment. But these precautions no longer felt like signs of fear or vulnerability. They felt like practical tools for maintaining the safety and peace of mind we'd worked so hard to achieve. Patricia had taught me that some people were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to control and manipulate others, and I'd learned that being prepared for such behavior was a sign of wisdom rather than paranoia. Most importantly, the experience had taught both Ryan and me that a marriage worth protecting was worth protecting completely, even when that protection required making difficult choices about family relationships. We'd learned that love sometimes meant disappointing people who claimed to care about us, and that loyalty to each other had to take precedence over loyalty to family members who were actively trying to harm our relationship. As I sat in our garden on a warm evening in late spring, watching Ryan tend to the roses we'd planted together, and admiring the sculpture that represented our journey through crisis and back to peace, I felt genuinely grateful for the clarity Patricia's harassment had brought to our lives. She'd forced us to examine our priorities, strengthen our boundaries, and choose each other with complete intentionality rather than taking our relationship for granted. The woman who'd wanted to destroy my marriage had inadvertently helped us build something stronger and more resilient than we'd ever imagined possible. And that, I thought as I listened to Ryan laughing at something our neighbor's dog was doing, might have been the most satisfying victory of all. Patricia Mitchell had lost her son, her reputation, and her freedom to manipulate our lives. But Emma and Ryan Collins had gained a marriage built on genuine partnership, mutual protection, and the kind of love that could survive anything. The call came from District Attorney Maria Santos, on a crisp morning in December, exactly 1 year after Patricia's initial arrest. Her voice was professional, but carried an undertone of satisfaction that I'd come to recognize from prosecutors who'd successfully closed a difficult case. Mrs. Collins, I wanted to inform you personally that Patricia Mitchell has violated the terms of her restraining order and will be facing additional criminal charges. My stomach dropped as I listened to DA Santos explain that Patricia had been caught on security footage approaching our street 3 times over the past month, despite the court order prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of our property. She wasn't caught on your cameras because she stayed just beyond the legal boundary, Santos continued. But one of your neighbors installed their own security system and captured her conducting what can only be described as surveillance of your home. The neighbor was Mrs. Helen Porter, the elderly woman, who'd first alerted me to suspicious activity around my car over a year ago. She'd apparently become concerned about a woman she'd noticed walking slowly past our house multiple times, and had invested in a doorbell camera to monitor the situation. When she realized the woman was Patricia Mitchell, whose arrest had been widely discussed in the neighborhood, she'd immediately contacted the police. Mrs. Porter's footage shows Mrs. Mitchell taking photographs of your house, writing notes, and on one occasion testing your front gate to see if it was locked, DA Santos explained grimly.
Represents a clear escalation of her harassment behavior and a direct violation of the restraining order. She's being charged with stalking, violation of a protection order, and attempted trespassing. The news that Patricia was still actively monitoring our home was deeply disturbing, but it also vindicated my decision to maintain security precautions long after her initial arrest. Ryan and I had occasionally wondered if we were being overly cautious by keeping the cameras and maintaining hypervigilance about home security. Now we knew that our instincts had been correct, and that Patricia had never stopped viewing us as targets for her manipulation and control. What does this mean for the existing case? I asked DA Santos, already knowing that this escalation would have serious consequences for Patricia's probation and plea agreement. She'll be arrested within the hour, Santos replied. Her probation will be revoked, and she'll face significant jail time for these new charges. The judge was very clear during her original sentencing that any violation of the restraining order would result in immediate incarceration. I called Ryan immediately after hanging up with DA Santos, reaching him at his office where he was preparing for an important client presentation. "They're arresting your mother again," I said without preamble.
She's been surveilling our house for weeks, and Mrs. Porter caught her on camera. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. I can't say I'm surprised, Ryan said finally, his voice heavy with a mixture of sadness and resignation. Part of me hoped that facing legal consequences would make her realize she needed to respect boundaries and get genuine help. But I guess some people are incapable of learning from their mistakes. His reaction was notably different from his shock and horror during Patricia's first arrest. This time, there was no confusion or denial, just the weary acceptance of someone who'd finally recognized the true nature of a person he'd once trusted completely. The arrest happened exactly as DA Santos had predicted. Patricia was taken into custody at her apartment complex, where she'd apparently been living alone since Robert had filed for divorce 6 months earlier. According to the police report, she'd been found with a notebook containing detailed observations about our daily routines, including notes about when we left for work, when we returned home, and which days we had visitors or service appointments. The depth of Patricia's continued obsession with our lives was staggering. The notebook contained weeks of surveillance data, suggesting that monitoring our activities had become a full-time occupation for her since losing her marriage and her relationship with Ryan. She'd been tracking us like a private investigator, gathering intelligence for purposes that were unclear but undoubtedly malicious. Ryan's father called that evening to express his horror at Patricia's continued harassment and to assure us that he fully supported whatever legal action we chose to pursue. I filed for divorce hoping that losing her family might force Patricia to confront her behavior and get serious about treatment, Robert explained. But it seems like it just made her more desperate and dangerous. I'm so sorry that you're both still dealing with this nightmare. The conversation with Robert was difficult but necessary. He'd been grappling with his own guilt about enabling Patricia's controlling behavior for decades, and her escalation to criminal stalking had forced him to confront some uncomfortable truths about their marriage. I spent 30 years making excuses for behavior I knew was wrong because it was easier than challenging her, he admitted. I enabled her manipulation by smoothing over the conflicts she created and pressuring other people to accommodate her unreasonable demands. Robert's honesty about his own role in Patricia's unchecked behavior was both refreshing and heartbreaking. He genuinely believed that keeping peace in the family was more important than addressing dysfunction, not realizing that his peacekeeping efforts were actually allowing Patricia's manipulation to escalate unchecked. His willingness to examine his own mistakes gave me hope that at least some members of Ryan's family were capable of genuine growth and accountability. The new criminal charges against Patricia moved through the court system quickly, thanks to the clear evidence of restraining order violations and the documentation of her continued harassment behavior. Her defense attorney attempted to argue that she was suffering from mental health issues that diminished her responsibility for her actions, but the prosecutor successfully demonstrated that her surveillance activities were too methodical and deliberate to be explained by mental illness alone. Mrs. Mitchell's behavior shows clear planning, intentionality, and awareness that her actions were prohibited. DA Santos argued during the sentencing hearing. She made calculated decisions to violate a court order and continue harassing the victims of her previous crimes. Mental health struggles do not excuse criminal behavior, especially when that behavior represents an escalation from previous offenses. The judge agreed with the prosecution's assessment and sentenced Patricia to 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and mandatory participation in a more intensive psychological treatment program. The restraining order was extended for an additional 5 years, and Patricia was prohibited from having any contact with Ryan, myself, or any member of our household through third parties or social media. This court will not tolerate continued harassment of law-abiding citizens, the judge stated firmly, during sentencing. Mrs. Mitchell has demonstrated through her actions that she poses a genuine threat to the safety and well-being of the complainants. The sentence I'm imposing today reflects the seriousness of stalking behavior and the need to protect the community from individuals who refuse to respect legal boundaries. Ryan chose not to attend Patricia's sentencing hearing, a decision I fully supported given the emotional toll that continued exposure to her manipulation had taken on him. Instead, we spent that morning having coffee with Jessica and her husband David, who'd become close friends and supporters throughout our ordeal with Patricia. You've both handled this situation with incredible grace and strength, Jessica observed. A lot of people would have let this kind of harassment destroy their marriage or drive them into isolation. The comment made me reflect on how much Ryan and I had grown as individuals and as a couple throughout this nightmare. We'd learned to communicate openly about threats to our relationship, to trust each other's instincts even when they conflicted with family expectations, and to prioritize our safety and happiness over social pressure to maintain toxic relationships. Patricia's harassment had been traumatic, but it had also taught us valuable lessons about resilience, boundary setting, and the importance of choosing partners who would protect rather than sacrifice each other. The week after Patricia's sentencing, Ryan and I decided to take a long overdue vacation to Hawaii, something we'd been planning before Patricia's harassment campaign had consumed so much of our time and emotional energy. The trip felt symbolic of our ability to reclaim our lives from someone who'd tried to control and diminish our happiness. We spent a week walking on beaches, exploring volcanic landscapes, and rediscovering the joy of being together without the constant stress of wondering what Patricia might do next. "I keep waiting for my phone to buzz with some new crisis," Ryan admitted as we watched the sunset from our hotel balcony. "It's going to take time to fully trust that she can't hurt us anymore." His observation resonated with my own experience of hypervigilance and the difficulty of relaxing when you've been under attack for an extended period. Healing from sustained harassment was a gradual process that required conscious effort to rebuild a sense of safety and normalcy. The therapist we'd been seeing individually, and as a couple, had warned us that recovery from stalking and harassment often involved a long period of readjustment as victims learned to trust their environment again. "Your nervous systems have been in fight or flight mode for over a year," she'd explained. "It's going to take time and conscious practice to convince your brains that the threat is actually gone and you can relax your defenses." During our time in Hawaii, Ryan and I had conversations about our future that we'd been unable to have while Patricia's harassment was ongoing. We talked about our career goals, our hopes for children, and our dreams of building a life together that wasn't defined by external threats or family dysfunction. These conversations felt like a luxury after months of focusing primarily on immediate safety and legal strategies. "I want us to start trying for a baby when we get back," Ryan said one evening as we walked along the beach. "I know timing isn't perfect, but I don't want to let my mother's problems delay the family we want to build together." The comment surprised me because we'd rarely discussed children during the worst period of harassment, focusing instead on protecting the relationship we already had. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" I asked, wanting to ensure that his decision was based on genuine desire, rather than an attempt to prove that Patricia hadn't succeeded in controlling our major life choices. "I'm sure," Ryan replied without hesitation. "I've spent too much time letting my mother's dysfunction dictate our decisions. I want to start making choices based on what we want for our lives, not on fear of how she might react." The conversation about starting a family felt like a turning point in our recovery from Patricia's harassment. We were finally able to think beyond survival mode and consider the kind of future we wanted to build together. The fact that Ryan was ready to become a father despite the trauma of discovering his own mother's capacity for cruelty showed remarkable resilience and faith in our relationship. When we returned from Hawaii, our house felt different, somehow more peaceful and secure than it had since Patricia's initial car vandalism. The security cameras were still monitoring our property, and the restraining order documentation was still filed in our home office, but these precautions no longer felt like responses to an active threat. They felt like reasonable safety measures that allowed us to live our lives without constant anxiety. I'd also made some changes to my daily routines that reflected increased confidence and decreased hypervigilance. I'd stopped carrying the small digital recorder that had become second nature during the worst period of harassment. I'd resumed my regular evening walks around the neighborhood that I'd abandoned when Patricia's surveillance made me feel unsafe in my own community. Most importantly, I'd stopped checking the security camera feeds compulsively throughout the day, trusting that the system would alert me if anything genuinely concerning occurred. The process of rebuilding normal life patterns was gradual but deeply satisfying. Simple activities like grocery shopping, meeting friends for coffee, or working late at the office without worrying about what I might find when I got home felt like luxuries after months of constant vigilance. I was rediscovering aspects of my personality that had been suppressed during the crisis, including a sense of humor and spontaneity that had been difficult to maintain while under attack. Ryan was experiencing his own version of recovery, which included reconnecting with hobbies and interests he'd neglected during the most intense period of family conflict. He'd resumed his weekly golf games with colleagues, started reading fiction again, and even begun planning a home renovation project we'd discussed before Patricia's harassment had consumed our attention. These seemed like small changes, but they represented a fundamental shift from crisis management to normal life planning. 6 months after Patricia's incarceration, we received unexpected news that she'd been transferred to a psychiatric facility for the remainder of her sentence. According to her attorney, she'd suffered what was described as a psychotic break in jail and was no longer considered competent to serve her sentence in the general prison population. The news was both concerning and somewhat relieving, suggesting that she was finally receiving the intensive mental health treatment that had been needed for years. Part of me feels sorry for her, Ryan admitted after we learned about Patricia's psychiatric hospitalization. She's obviously been struggling with serious mental health issues that went untreated for too long. But I also can't forget that she chose to harass you instead of getting help, and that those choices had real consequences for both of us. His ability to feel compassion for his mother, while maintaining appropriate boundaries, was a sign of emotional maturity and healing that impressed me. The psychiatric evaluation report, which was shared with us as victims of Patricia's crimes, revealed a complex picture of personality disorders, untreated trauma from her own childhood, and what the evaluating psychiatrist described as profound difficulty accepting that other people have needs and rights that conflict with her desires. The report confirmed what we'd suspected about Patricia's inability to genuinely change without intensive long-term treatment. More importantly for our peace of mind, the psychiatrist concluded that Patricia represented a continued risk to our safety if she were released without significant therapeutic intervention and ongoing monitoring. The recommendation was for at least 2 years of inpatient treatment followed by extensive outpatient supervision and continued compliance with the restraining order. This meant that we could reasonably expect several years of safety from further harassment. As our 3rd wedding anniversary approached, Ryan surprised me with news that felt like a miracle after everything we'd endured. I got the promotion, he announced, walking into our kitchen with a bottle of champagne and a grin that reached his eyes for the first time in months. The Portland job came through, but with a twist. They want me to head up the new Riverside office instead of relocating. The irony wasn't lost on either of us that Ryan was achieving the career advancement Patricia had once demanded he pursue, but on terms that allowed us to stay in the home and community we'd built together. He'd been able to negotiate a promotion that met his professional goals without requiring the sacrifices Patricia had insisted were necessary for his success. It felt like a victory over her manipulation, and a validation of our decision to prioritize our marriage over her demands. The best part, Ryan continued, is that the new position comes with stock options and a significant salary increase. We'll be able to pay off the house early and start that college fund for the baby. The mention of the baby made my heart skip, because we'd just learned the previous week that our attempts to start a family had been successful. I was 6 weeks pregnant with our first child, a development we'd been keeping private while we adjusted to the reality of impending parenthood. The pregnancy had been planned and wanted, but the timing felt especially meaningful, given everything we'd overcome to protect our relationship. Patricia had tried to prevent us from building a life together, but we were about to bring a new life into the world that would be completely free from her influence. Our child would grow up in a home where manipulation and harassment weren't tolerated, where boundaries were respected, and where love wasn't conditional on compliance with unreasonable demands. I've been thinking about what kind of father I want to be, Ryan said that evening as we celebrated his promotion and discussed our growing family. I want to be the kind of parent who protects their child from toxic people, even when those toxic people are family members. I never want our kid to experience the confusion and loyalty conflicts I went through with my mother. His commitment to breaking the cycle of manipulation and control that had characterized his own childhood was one of the things I loved most about Ryan. He'd done the difficult work of recognizing dysfunction, setting boundaries, and choosing healthier patterns for our own family. Our child would benefit from having a father who understood the difference between genuine love and manipulative control. As I reflected on our journey from Patricia's initial harassment to our current state of security and happiness, I realized that we'd achieved something remarkable. We'd survived a sustained attack on our marriage by someone who was supposed to love and support us. We'd navigated legal proceedings, protected our safety, and maintained our relationship, despite external pressure designed to destroy it. Most importantly, we'd emerged from the crisis stronger, wiser, and more committed to each other than ever before. The woman who'd keyed my car in the early hours of an October morning had intended to make me feel vulnerable and dependent. Instead, she'd taught me that I was capable of protecting myself, documenting threats, and fighting back against people who tried to control my life. She'd wanted to drive a wedge between Ryan and me, but she'd actually forced us to develop the kind of deep trust and communication that many couples never achieve. Patricia Mitchell had lost her son, her marriage, her freedom, and her reputation in pursuit of control that had never actually belonged to her. Emma and Ryan Collins had gained a stronger marriage, a deeper understanding of genuine love, and the confidence that comes from surviving someone's worst intentions and emerging victorious. As I sat in our garden that evening, watching Ryan assemble a crib for the baby we'd soon welcome into our peaceful, secure home, I realized that Patricia's greatest punishment wasn't jail time or psychiatric treatment. It was the knowledge that she'd completely failed to destroy the happiness she'd worked so hard to eliminate. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.